we've created that kind of Soviet style of hesitancy, not about vaccines, but about speech.
I enlisted in the clinical trial to do my part and help get us all out of the pandemic.
11 hospitalizations, 7 life flights.
Post-vaccine neuropathy, severe tinnitus, severe POTS.
Mobility is dependent on a wheelchair now.
Censorship is that you're not able to tell these stories online. What is the speech that they are shutting down?
Sharing what happened to them, sharing steps in the recovery process. A lot of sharp-toned emails from the White House imposing this relentless, almost daily pressure on the social media platforms.
Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Reddit.
It was devastating.
It could have happened to anybody. And we were just the ones that drew the short straw.
Good afternoon and welcome to the New Civil Liberties Alliance Lunch and Law. Today's topic will be the censorship-industrial complex silences the vaccine injured. And here to discuss that important topic with us is Litigation Counsel Casey Norman from the New Civil Liberties Alliance and two of NCLA's clients in the Dressen v. Flaherty case. And I thought maybe we would begin, Casey, let you introduce our clients.
Sure. So this is Dressen and this is Nikki, Holland, two of our 6 clients in this case. Bree and Nikki are 2 exceptional human beings who, despite their vaccine injuries, are still working to protect the rights of the vaccine injured. That's actually why they're in DC right now. They spent the day yesterday at the Capitol, and a lot of today will be spent at the Capitol as well. We took on their case because both of them, following their vaccine injuries, were heavily censored, and their speech has been suppressed for years, and this is an ongoing issue. So that's why we're fighting this fight.
Yeah, they're fighting it on Capitol Hill. We're fighting it with them in the courts of law, and it's a very important topic. And glad that you're here with us to talk about it today. Maybe I'll start, Casey, with you, and just ask, what is it about the speech that Bree and Nikki and our other clients have uttered that bothers the government so much? Why are they? Maybe not why, because we'll get to that, but what is the speech that they are shutting down?
So the actual speech that we're seeing being censored or flagged as harmful misinformation or as dangerous, violent content has been simply personal experiences after they were medically harmed by the vaccine. They posted on platforms like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, sharing what happened to them, sharing steps in the recovery process. This has included posts on private online support groups among the vaccine injured, seeking support, exchanging knowledge about what had worked for them in their recovery processes, what had not. This is far from the very narrow set of exceptions of speech that are not protected by the First Amendment. That's, incitement to violence, threats, fraud, that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Bree, let me ask you. When I first heard about your case, I was particularly struck by the fact that you volunteered to participate in a vaccine trial. Can you tell us what led you to do that, and a little bit about maybe when you first noticed that you were injured and how you got diagnosed?
Yeah, so I was super excited about participating in the scientific process. I was a lifetime vaccine taker and had no issues whatsoever. And so I enlisted in the clinical trial to do my part and help get us all out of the pandemic. It didn't seem like it was any kind of risk at all, So yeah, I got my shot, and I ended up with a reaction that started within an hour. And it was severe pins and needles, which is something that a lot of people get. They have this weird, nerve issue that it just starts and it persists, and for most, when it starts, it's permanent. So it went from there to 2.5 weeks later. I was in the hospital. My legs weren't working. My bladder wasn't working. I couldn't see straight. My sensitivity to sound was so bad I had to have earplugs in and earmuffs on. And that was just the beginning of a cascade of what would ensue.
And this was, so who first told you that these symptoms were related to the fact that you had taken the vaccine?
Actually, the test clinic for AstraZeneca, when I was in the hospital, they called me And they said, yeah, we think this is related to the vaccine, and as such, we're going to tell you not to get the second dose. So they were the first ones. The doctors at the hospital diagnosed me with anxiety and sent me home with intensive in-home physical and occupational therapy because my legs weren't working because of anxiety. And so it wasn't until 7 months later.
I hate it when I get anxious and my legs stop working.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. So, sometimes it just happens. I don't know. But, and they convinced me because they kept saying it over and over, if you just chill, then this will go away. And I believed them. And so I gaslit myself but my husband was like, no, I don't know what. Yeah. And he's a chemist. So he knows a little bit of something. And so, we reached out to the National Institutes of Health.
Fair to say you come from a pro-science family then.
Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah. And so, and at the NIH is where I actually got my real diagnoses.
And that's the National Institutes of Health, which is a federal government institution.
Yeah, so they flew me out. So they evaluated me in person and they treated me in person in June of 2021. And I got, all the diagnoses that were not anxiety. Anxiety isn't anywhere on my records from the NIH. So post-vaccine neuropathy, severe tinnitus, severe POTS. There's a couple of other things on there, but yeah. So that's where I was able to get validation, was actually from the
accurate diagnosis.
Yes, was from the leading health agency in the country.
Yeah.
So
let me ask you the same question, Nikki. How did you come to take the vaccine? And Casey tells me that you're a physical therapist, so you also have been around the medical community. Did that factor into your decision to want to get the vaccine?
Absolutely. Being a physical therapist and being a part of the healthcare world, it was kind of a pressure thing as far as do your part, and this could help, as far as protecting the patients that I was going into. I was in a home health setting. So I said, sure, let's do this. And it was my second Moderna vaccine, and it was February 2021. And within a couple days, was having shortness of breath. And within a week of my vaccine, ended up in the hospital with respiratory failure and on the ventilator. So that's kind of how it started, was more of the respiratory stuff with me. But during those first few months and since then, it has progressed to issues with my bladder, my stomach not working, having to have a feeding tube, also having where I have laryngospasms where my throat closes off, where I have to have a trach if needed. And then blood clots and just a whole line of neurological issues, which I found out recently because it took forever as far as a diagnosis of trying to figure out what was going on. Ended up with some of the same things that Bree had, where it was a demyelinating disease, neurological. And so been in and out of the hospital, 11 hospitalizations, 7 life flights, 7 times on the ventilator.
7 life flights?
Yes.
I just want to make sure everybody heard that.
Yes.
Yeah.
7, I believe, if I'm counting right, 7 times on the ventilator. And yes, it has been quite an ordeal.
And you came in today in a wheelchair. You're sitting here with us, but you're not able to get around the way that you want to.
No, absolutely not. I can take some steps with assistance or assisted device. However, the majority of mobility is dependent on a wheelchair now.
Well, I think it was important to hear your stories, because one of the things that has happened as a result of the censorship is that you're not able to tell these stories online. And so we want to make sure that we get that information out there. But the lawsuit itself is about what the government has done in terms of censoring. And so, Casey, let me come back to you. This case is denoted Dressen v. Flaherty. Who's Flaherty?
So Rob Flaherty was a senior White House advisor. And he was one of the driving forces, well, from what we've seen at least, in a lot of information discovery produced in another case called Missouri v. Biden, another one of NCLA's cases.
I've heard of it.
You might be familiar. We've seen thousands of emails from various government agencies and officials imposing pressure and coercion and inducements on these Facebook or on these social media companies. Telling them we need this kind of viewpoint, we need this kind of content removed. Why is it still here? We're talking to the highest levels of the White House, and I mean highest, that kind of communication.
Right.
And Rob Flaherty is
What is the highest level at the White House, by the way?
That would be the president.
Oh, well,
I believe.
okay.
He's one of the defendants in this lawsuit, actually. But Rob Flaherty is one of the actors of the government that we see appear in many of these thousands of emails. He was just kind of enraged in a lot of these correspondences and the pressure that is being imposed on the companies themselves. So that's why we put him as the named defendant in the case.
Yeah. So so these are social media platforms where your speech has been posted. So Bree, which social media platforms have you interacted with primarily?
All of them. I mean,
okay.
well, one shuts you down, so you go to the next, and then they shut you down, so you go to the next. So I mean, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. TikTok was most intolerant. They killed our account more than anybody else. YouTube, Instagram, Reddit. Reddit even was censoring people. So yes, as far as we're concerned, we found it everywhere we turned. We would leave one because we were not welcome there, and then we'd try to find a home somewhere else and find out we were unwelcome there too.
Same experience, Nikki?
Yeah, the majority of my stuff was through Facebook and TikTok and YouTube. So.
And I understand that one of the other plaintiffs in the lawsuit, Ernest Ramirez, was shut down from a fundraising website. Mm-hmm. Do you have the specifics on that, Casey?
Yeah, so just to give a little bit of background, our client, Ernest Ramirez, he wasn't severely injured by the vaccine himself, but his 16-year-old son took the Pfizer vaccine for the first time, and he died of myocarditis 5 days later. So Ernest, I think for a while, he was in a very dark place, understandably, and one kind of inspiration for him was the ability to talk about what had happened to his son and do his son's memory justice and honor. So he started going around Texas, where he's from, speaking about what had happened. And he eventually wanted to travel more and spread this story, farther out among the different states around the country. So he was raising funds on GoFundMe to afford a trip to Washington, D.C. to talk about his son. And I believe it was within a week of creating his account, I think he'd raised about $2,000. He received a notification from GoFundMe that his account had been deleted. The funds were removed from it, so he was deprived of everything he'd raised in that week. And so, I mean, you just, with all of them, but I mean, this is just one example of the egregious kinds of censorship and denial of the ability to speak about personal experiences.
Bree, you said something a minute ago. You said we have been shut down. It's very much a community that you've been trying to build. Can you talk about that? It's not just your own personal speech on your own social media channels.
Yeah, I mean, one of the incredible experiences, in this unique situation has been finding others like us, like Nikki and Ernest and Sean Barkovich and, Susanna
Dobbs.
Newell, Christy Dobbs. I mean, these are all phenomenal people, families, they were law-abiding citizens, just, contributing to society and medical field and, in their other jobs that they had. And then, of course, tragedy struck and all of our lives dramatically changed. Our lives and our families' lives changed. And then we had nowhere to go. Our medical communities didn't know what to do with us. They didn't even want to listen to us. It was like, well, here's a psych med, see ya.
And I understood, Sam, that you didn't even want to talk about it for several months because you were afraid that your story might dissuade other people from getting the vaccine.
I self-censored for about 7 months, and it was just, I didn't want to be part of the conflict that was going on. I didn't want, I'm a preschool teacher by trade. Like this is so opposite, to who I am. And so, but after you find 2 people, and then that turns into 4, and then it turns into 8, and then 12, and then before you know it, there's thousands, and they're all lost, and you're all huddled up together in these little groups, and you're just hoping that nobody finds you and shuts you down from your only connections with others that get it.
When you say huddled in these groups, you're talking about online groups, online forums where vaccine injured folks are doing what? What kinds of messages are you sharing with each other?
So these support groups, they're secret support groups, so you can't just go on there and find them, like injury support groups. We don't do that. We actually made them, so the only way you can find them is by finding someone that's injured and then having access that way. So we've vetted everybody into these groups.
So they're private and they're self-contained.
Yeah. So it's not like that's what blows my mind, because it's like, why would that not be allowed? I mean, these are people with disabilities. These are people that they literally, their lives were depending on these connections with others. And for some reason that was deemed not okay, and a danger to society and to the United States government, when it's really just everyday Americans that had no choice in what happened to them. I mean, this could have happened to anybody. And we were just the ones that drew the short straw. And so we were huddled up together in these groups, and then, poof, they were gone.
And Nikki, the same experience when you were trying to participate in some of these groups. What kind of messages were you sharing, and what kind of messages were getting taken down?
Yeah. It took me until about August from February to really start speaking out. But during that time, I searched for other support, for people that had similar reactions, and what have they done, who have they seen, for help. Came up with nothing. There was nothing popping up. And every platform I went to, if you tried to search, it would be the complete opposite of what I was looking for. And so it was when I shared my story that I started having tons of people reaching out to me. And at that point, that's when everybody started to share groups, such as the one that Bree had helped create, and other groups to connect with these people. And so basically, we were just sharing, hey, what have you gone through? What are your symptoms? What have you had? Who have you seen? And what has helped you? So it was medical. At first, it was a lot of medical direction. And then as the time went on, it was more of emotional support. So. Sure.
When you first reached out, how were you doing that? Was that on social media as well?
It was. My main platform I started reaching out was Facebook. Mm-hmm. And that's where everything kind of started to come out. And I would have some posts taken down and didn't understand what was going on, and then started to see some of my other friends that were in the same boat, what was going on, and the complexity of how we were being censored. And it was devastating, because there were times in which I would look for groups, I would look for individuals, and I know that I'd just talked to them, or I know that I'd just been in there, and I couldn't find it. Mm-hmm. And so there are times where, hey, I've got a question, a medical, like, have you done? Or there are times where you just get low and you need somebody that understands. And unfortunately, a lot of people ran into that, and it was very difficult for a lot in our community.
Well, and it may be something that more people are familiar with in sort of the cancer context, that when people are diagnosed, it's a dark moment, and they reach out to these networks that exist for support and mental health to help them fight and get through the experience, and sometimes successfully, sometimes not, but at least they have the support group along the way. And it sounds like that's the same kind of support network, Bree, that you were trying to make sure was available for the vaccine injured.
Yeah.
So Nikki mentioned the complexity of how these were being shut down. Casey, maybe you can speak to that. So what was happening to these posts that were disappearing?
Yes, I guess when we say censorship, it's a bit vague. You see anything from posts actually being removed to posts being flagged as misinformation, with a link that says, for more or actual reliable information, here's the CDC's website, check that out instead. Like Nikki was saying, some of her posts were labeled as like violent content or harmful content that violates our community standards, that kind of thing. But not only were posts being flagged or removed, but also accounts and online private groups were at risk of being either suspended or frozen or just removed entirely. Some of these groups, they would be deleted, and then they lose access to thousands of members who were exchanging information and support, and you can't find those people like that again.
Sure.
So huge impact in various ways through this censorship.
So these support groups are built organically over time, and then when the government orders them shut down or they're censored in some way, then you're starting from scratch. At least the first time this got shut down. Is that what you were up against?
Yeah, it was a shock at first because we couldn't understand why. I still don't understand why. But we just didn't even know where to begin, and so we were. But then, on the other hand, to us, we know what we were doing, and there was absolutely nothing wrong with what we were doing.
Right.
And so we knew what they were doing was wrong, and so it kind of started lighting a fire. It's like, okay, if they're going to come after us for trying to live and survive and help other people live and survive, okay, then we're going to start fighting back a little bit. So we spent just as much time trying to keep these new groups, growing and keep these connections together. We spent just as much time, helping the community grow and support each other as we did managing the censorship overlords who were managing everything that came out of our, everything we typed up. So,
Brianne, I'm so impressed with the effort that you have put into keeping these support groups up and running. What motivates you? Why are you so intent to do that?
Because it's wrong. And the America that I grew up in, that the principles that I was raised with, are not these principles.
Yeah.
So it's just that simple. It's like Nikki's a mom too, and it's like there is no way we want to be able to stand back and let this same atrocity happen to the next generation. And so, we're going to fight tooth and nail with everything that we can, with your help, obviously, to make sure that this never happens again.
So Casey, tell us about the lawsuit. Who are you suing, and maybe explain who you're not suing and why.
Yeah, so one question that has come up a lot, I think, when people initially hear about this lawsuit is, why are we suing mostly federal government defendants? It's federal government officials and agencies, as opposed to the social media companies themselves. And I think the primary reason why we've done that is because we view the source of the problem, the instigating factor here, really as being the government. This is not the independent decisions of the social media companies who are just deciding, oh, that's problematic, this is our content moderation policy, we're going to take that off. What we've seen, and we discussed a little bit.
Can I just pause you there? So if it turned out that it was 100% the social media companies doing this on their own without any involvement with the government, then would the First Amendment apply to that?
Exactly, yeah. So the First Amendment only applies to the government. It wouldn't apply to the private social media companies.
So it might be despicable that they were doing it, but it wouldn't necessarily be unconstitutional.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so, but it's not just the social media companies involved here, you were getting ready to say.
No, yeah. So what we've seen, as I mentioned before, we've seen a lot of information from the Twitter files, for example, and also from the information produced in Missouri v. Biden, the other censorship-related case, of just thousands of emails that I mentioned directed by the government to these social media companies, stating not just casual, oh, this is our policy, you should consider this, but just anger-filled, pressure-filled requests, demands that certain content, certain viewpoints are removed. And this includes vaccine-injured speech and vaccine-related speech, where they've said it might be true, but if it might induce hesitancy in the general populace to not take the vaccine, then we don't want that. That's got to be removed from your platforms, period. And you see a lot of sharp-toned emails from the White House, from the Surgeon General's office, imposing this relentless, almost daily pressure on the social media platforms. And we've seen that the social media platforms have complied, their policies have changed. In some of the emails, you'll see the social media executives say, you know what, this kind of speech doesn't really violate our policies. We don't feel comfortable removing that. And then, after some more pressure, they change their policies and you see this kind of speech removed. So this is clearly not just independent choice by private entities. This is something driven by the government, quite clearly.
So ordinarily we think if there's, the First Amendment protects false speech for starters. So even if this speech weren't true, it would be subject to First Amendment protection. But typically we say that if there's speech that you disagree with, then you would counteract that with more speech and better speech. And the government has the world's largest megaphone. So why not more speech and better speech? Why do they need to shut down the speech that other people are participating in?
I think it's a question of power and controlling the narrative. This kind of speech questioned the preferred narrative of everybody should get the vaccine. There shouldn't be hesitancy. No one should know apparently the side effects, or even if it's a small amount of the population who's getting injured, they didn't want anyone to know about it. They wanted everyone to get it. So this kind of speech threatens that narrative, that policy drive. And I think during the pandemic, that's an emergency, unusual situation. And I think the general population was more willing, living in that confusing, frightening state, to relinquish, some liberties and maybe allow some of this to take place where otherwise it might have been more in the public focus and the media's focus. And they've taken hold of that power and they haven't let go of it yet.
Bree, I understand the concern about vaccine hesitancy, and there may be some folks out there who would be good candidates for getting the vaccine who aren't taking the vaccine, but presumably there are other people out there who are not good candidates for taking the vaccine, who aren't hearing all the speech that they should be hearing, or at least aren't hearing the full sort of risks and benefits that they ought to hear before making a well-informed judgment. But I guess the piece I'm struggling with is, how does a private self-contained support group of people who have already taken the vaccine, how does that contribute to vaccine hesitancy at all?
It's a good question. We're still battling that to this day. Up ahead of our trip here, there were people canvassing before we showed up on the Hill, letting everybody know that we are anti-vaxxers. It's like, I'm fully vaccinated. So, I don't know. If you have a problem with penicillin, you can say, I have a problem with penicillin, don't give me any more penicillin.
Right.
And no one's going to come after you saying, you're anti-penicillin. You
might even be allergic to penicillin. I am.
Right.
Don't give me penicillin.
See, I'm sure nobody has come after you and said, well, you must be anti-penicillin. You must be pro-bacteria.
That's right. That's right.
So, but it's obviously a multi-layered approach to, make sure that the narrative moves in a certain direction. And if you're going to combat that, sadly, we're, kind of the living, breathing evidence of the collateral damage of what happens when you have to go up against that big machine.
Yeah.
So.
And Nikki, maybe I'll ask you, I think when people say vaccine hesitancy, I think what they really mean, and it's hard for me to put believe me, it's really hard for me to put my mind in the mind of the regulator, but I'll try. I think when they talk about vaccine hesitancy, what they're ultimately saying is, we think it will save lives if more people get the vaccine. And it may be that some people are harmed along the way, but in some sort of utilitarian calculus, more people are helped than are harmed, and so we just want everybody to get the vaccine. But they're not willing to say that, so they're just sort of coming down on you for supposedly promoting vaccine hesitancy.
Being from a healthcare background, I understand that every procedure, every medicine has risk. And they've always, for the majority, have presented that aspect of it.
Every late night TV ad.
Right. Every pharmaceutical commercial has a list of, things that could happen, including death. Why is this any different? Why is this needing to be protected? Our rights as American is to be able to have informed consent. That is the position that the healthcare should take. In every procedure you go to, you have to sign an informed consent. That informed consent is not accurate if it doesn't include all the possibilities. And that's what we're trying to say. We just want equality for vaccine injured as any other injured during any other medicine or procedures, and to have that full and accurate consent. It's not necessary hesitancy, is what they're trying to label it as it is the narrative, but just trying to understand what all of the risks are so you can make that personal choice.
A desire to be well informed.
Right.
Yeah. The other thing that we don't hear much about is, but I'm guessing that you guys maybe have heard more about this. And there are some people who have, we talked about Ernest's son dying as a result of the vaccine, but there are other people who have been severely vaccine injured who have had severe mental health problems and either attempted suicide or committed suicide. Is that something that you think that shutting down support groups is contributing to?
100%.
I do.
No question.
Yeah.
I know
It's
personally it's devastating dealing with the medical aspect, but once that becomes stable, you realize how mentally draining all of it is to learn to live with this new life. And with taking away that support, I know personally it's hard. And I know there were a few cases where it didn't turn out as well.
And Nikki, you mentioned before we got underway that there's been a kind of a stigma attached to being vaccine injured that you're hoping to break down. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Absolutely. With this censorship case, I think the aspect of it, by being censored on social media, not only are you taking away our rights, but you are enforcing this stigma and creating this stereotype around us to the public and to healthcare. So not only are we getting censorship from the government, that storm, that narrative has created hatred towards us from both sides. It has, when we go to the doctors, they have been censored or censored of us, and it makes us difficult to find that healthcare that we need because those thoughts and the way that we're viewed are already pre-described in their brains. So.
Are doctors, do you think, reluctant to diagnose someone as vaccine injured?
Oh, I do. It is very, for the majority, the most part, they are very reluctant. I know that there are, things as, being reprimanded for any kind of misinformation from larger organizations that they work with, from other healthcare organizations. You don't want to spread misinformation. Well, misinformation has become subjective. My personal story of what has actually happened is not misinformation. It actually happened. So they are, I think, are reluctant. I think some of them have been reprimanded for any kind of things that would create hesitancy for the vaccine.
Bree, can I ask you the same question? Do you have thoughts about the sort of stigma that has existed around being vaccine injured, and what more can be done to try to break down that some of those misperceptions?
Well, we kind of joke a lot about it because it's hard being stuck in a dumpster fire all the time. But there's a lot that can be done. I think cases like this are critical for that. Without that, we remain without any voice, and we really do need more lawyers, more people to come and help the voiceless, give a voice to the voiceless, and defend these rights that are, First Amendment. That's a tenet to American freedom. That's as free as it gets right there, and American as it gets. Yes, and so and as tenuous and as, crazy as it may be, I mean, we really do need to step up and defend those rights. And we obviously saw a lot of missteps during the pandemic that show the importance of that, But the other part of that is that, now we're standing up against this huge campaign that's been blasted for the last 2-3 years, and we're really, at the end of the day, we're really just everyday Americans. We're moms, we're dads, we could be your friends, your neighbors, your coworker, and we're the unlucky one. That's a far stretch from anti-vax, anti-government, family, anti-science,
Sure.
All the things that we have, as our scarlet letter, and we didn't deserve that. So
On top of being vaccine injured,
on top of being vaccine injured, so
being slandered.
So I mean, like when you deal with any kind of, complex chronic illness, I mean, like if you're battling for your life with cancer, and there's always, a lot of times there's lasting effects from after your cancer treatments are done. When you sit down in the doctor's office, you're validated. They usually bring in your family to support you. There's a plan. There's people that rally around you. There's organizations that are getting money from the government, pharmaceutical companies, and they're well funded. They're well researched.
Charitable often.
Yeah, and there's a pathway of hope moving forward, right? And with this, there's no pathway. Like we're still, I guess there's kind of a rocky pathway. We're, pulling the weeds out as we go. We're like sitting there with a flashlight when there should be a big floodlight to show the path.
You're blazing the trail yourselves. It
Yeah,
sounds like
100%. And so, the reality is the injury itself was hard enough on everybody. But the emotional impact of the abuse from the government, social media companies, even our own medical teams is just as bad, if not worse.
Yeah. Casey, Nikki used the word misinformation, and we've seen that word in our Missouri v. Biden litigation as well. What's misinformation, disinformation, malinformation? We hear these terms. I don't remember hearing these terms 10 years ago, but suddenly the government is throwing these terms around as though they're relevant to what is and isn't protected by the First Amendment.
Yeah, I'm not sure if these are like three new creatures that were born out of the pandemic. They certainly don't appear in the text of the First Amendment. They don't qualify as speech that can be suppressed and doesn't count as speech that can be protected. But from what I've gleaned, misinformation is unintentionally false. You post something you didn't know was false or inaccurate, and it turns out that it was. Disinformation.
So that would be the emails that my parents send me. Do you guys get these, right? That always have that if you would just go on Snopes, you would find out that this was not true, but instead you're sending it out to 100 of your friends.
My parents are in the audience; they don't send me those emails.
Oh,
I can't relate, but yes.
All right.
That sounds
Bad question.
That sounds right, though. So yeah, I'll accept that example.
Okay.
And so disinformation.
Your parents are younger than my parents.
That's fine. One day I'll be receiving the same, and I'll know that it's misinformation, and I can tell them that.
That's right.
Disinformation, though, is when it's intentionally false. Like you knew you were lying, you posted something, you're trying to drive some hoax or conspiracy or something, and knowing that it's not true. And malinformation, which I think is the most interesting and disturbing, is true speech, but it might cause some kind of harm. So I think that's what the government would characterize the vaccine injured speech as being. It's true, this happened to them, but they feel justified in censoring it because it might induce vaccine hesitancy. People might hesitate, and so we must suppress it anyway.
So we have these kinds of speech, and so how does the government approach this? Do they have direct access to shut these things down on social media? Are they telling the social media companies what to do? Like how does, and you may not have all the information yet because I understand it's still early in the litigation, but
right.
what are the kinds of things that you anticipate seeing here?
Yeah, so we haven't made it to discovery, but from what we've seen, at least from the emails I was discussing earlier, is either it's just a matter of heavy, almost daily pressure, emails saying, we talked about this yesterday, why is the speech still there? Get rid of this person's speech, get rid of the vaccine-related speech, just kind of ongoing, heavy, relentless demands. It also varies between the platforms. Some of the platforms created things called, I believe, partner portals. And these are created so that government agents can go in and more easily monitor the speech and flag speech that they think is problematic and that they think the platform should remove or flag as misinformation or disinformation. And I'm sure we'll learn more once we actually get access to discovery materials, but a lot of it's already out there.
Well, and one thing I know we've seen already is Bree's name, Brianne Dressen, appeared by name in one of these emails that was sent trying to shut her down and her group. I think it was one that was, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think it was one that was sent by the Stanford Internet Observatory. Yeah,
actually, it was a report. One of the Stanford Internet Observatory is one of the defendants, and they created this thing called the Virality Project during the pandemic, and its purpose was basically to monitor for censorship vaccine-related speech. And they would just issue these reports saying, what have we found? What is problematic? What should be focused more on suppressing? And yeah, they named in one of the most recent reports, they named Bree. It was under a section that said ongoing themes and tactics of people, extremists, anti-vaxxers, the kinds of narratives that were going around supposedly spreading harmful, anti-vax messages. And they described what happened to her with skepticism. They said, these so-called injuries with no basis.
That were diagnosed by the National Institutes of Health.
Unverified, I think, is the word they used.
Yeah, unverified, exactly.
I don't think they tried to verify it. I didn't see anything on my phone pop up.
Right, right, exactly. But so that's what really caught our attention with them, because they named her, mischaracterized everything about what had happened to her, and put her on a list of targets for censorship, essentially, that was provided to these government agents and agencies and officials.
What did you think when you saw that, Bree?
Well, I'm a preschool teacher, so that freaked me out quite a bit. So I made my husband drive me to the store, and I got a gluten-free cookie and just sat there for a while, just trying to figure out what the heck the government is doing. But I mean, like, I'm a normal, regular person just trying to help other people like me. And apparently that is taboo. It still just blows my mind that it's like our very existence, the fact that we even exist is not cool, and we're like a threat to government security. And it's like it just doesn't make any sense.
Well, the truth is inconvenient sometimes, I think. And it would be easier for everyone if everyone who took the vaccine had a wonderful experience and nothing bad ever happened to anyone who took the vaccine. That would be a wonderful story if that were true and it didn't have any side effects. But Nikki, as you said before, that's not true for most medicines. Most vaccines, the percentage of people who are impacted varies. And we don't know at this point the percentage, whether it's Moderna or Pfizer or AstraZeneca. We don't know exactly what the percentages are, people who are having negative reactions, but we know that it's not 0%.
No, it never is 0%. So this, why should this be?
Yeah, I think there's a sort of a false expectation here in some sense around if you really want to stop vaccine hesitancy, it seems to me that you'd be honest with the American people. And you'd say, here's what we know, here's what we don't know. You can trust us because we're providing you all the information. It seems to me when you start shutting down truthful information, that's what's going to spur hesitancy. That's what makes people suspicious. What's the government trying to hide is what I worry people think when they hear about stories like what's happened to you in the way of censorship.
I never questioned the government or the whole issue behind it until I was censored. And then that made me question. So yes, they're being their own worst enemy in this. And they call us creating vaccine hesitancy. In fact, they are the ones creating hesitancy by not helping, reaching out to us, and trying to make this, if the overall intention was a utilitarian effect, to make this vaccine better by studying things that could, that did occur from it.
Well, and I would think that if we could study the people who were injured by the vaccine, we might learn something about the vaccine that would help us produce better vaccines that injured fewer people in the future. But if we're lying about it and we're pretending that the problem doesn't exist, then we're denying ourselves the opportunity to make a better product and injure fewer people in the future. I would just implore public health authorities be honest. Be honest. Don't hide from the truth. Don't run away from reality. That's not helpful, and it doesn't. Hopefully, one of the things, Casey, that this lawsuit does is it awakens the government to the problem with trying to shut down truthful speech.
Exactly. I mean, ultimately, we're hoping it would be excellent to have explicit acknowledgement from courts that this conduct is violative of the First Amendment, period. It's going to be a lot harder, I think, for the government officials to justify the conduct. I think they've been operating thinking that none of this was going to be outed. I don't think they thought lawsuits would make it to the discovery stage where all of these thousands of emails are now public. I think they're probably already thinking twice a bit, but with explicit instructions from the courts stating this is unacceptable, it has to stop, it's going to be a lot harder for them in the future.
Yeah. One of the questions that I know that you've gotten, Casey, and so I'll ask it, and we'll get to hear your answer. Don't you want lies off of these platforms? I mean, social media is a place where lots of false information spreads like wildfire. Shouldn't the government be there to protect us all from free speech?
I think there are many issues with that. One, I mean, you have these private companies that have their own content moderation policies, and they can choose, it won't be a violation of the First Amendment if they choose independently what speech appears and what doesn't. What we're seeing here, though, is the government taking an active role in deciding what it prefers Americans to hear and what it prefers Americans never to hear. And also, lies are not, false information is still protected by the First Amendment, as I think we discussed earlier. So, I mean, the government, just the bottom line really is the government has zero role deciding what protected speech under the First Amendment is heard or suppressed or stifled and what isn't. And that includes lies. And you can leave that to the private companies to decide on their own. They don't need this pressure and the threats. And we certainly don't need to see this kind of speech being removed.
I'm shocked that you're not more concerned about the cognitive infrastructure of the United States, Casey. I'm joking because that's literally what the Department of Homeland Security said, is that their responsibility is to protect American infrastructure, and that includes the cognitive infrastructure of the United States.
Yeah, they even considered creating a boots on the ground team to fight mis and disinformation. It was in one of their reports during the pandemic. They were going to have, I guess, teams physically go to your home and shut down your laptop if you're posting too much misinformation on Facebook. I don't really know how that would work logistically, but I mean, you see these ideas floating around at the highest levels of these federal government agencies, and it's beyond disturbing. It's almost funny if it weren't so disturbing.
Yeah, I mean, you were saying I'm just a preschool teacher. I mean, imagine if someone showed up at your home to take your laptop because of something that you were posting online. That would be, we haven't seen that, at least not that I'm aware of. We haven't seen that yet. Let's hope we never get there. But it's bad enough to have these.
I know some good lawyers, so you guys can help me out.
Fantastic. What do you think the ideal outcome is for this case?
I think it's a bit what I was describing before. We want to see the courts recognize explicitly that this kind of conduct, this kind of suppression of protected speech is a violation of the First Amendment. And we'd also like to see an order prohibiting them from ever engaging in this kind of misconduct again. And ultimately that means that our clients in the vaccine-injured community, and ultimately, ideally, all Americans can just engage in their First Amendment rights without fearing consequences or being labeled a misinformant or a liar or an outcast simply for exercising one of the core rights of being an American.
Yeah, I'm guessing, Bree, when you first started doing this, you didn't think that you were doing something risky or dangerous or something that would attract government attention.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that simple. There's all of what has happened with the censorship, all of it is something it was not on my bingo card of life. Like, vaccine injury wasn't on the bingo card either, but, like some kind of pharmaceutical side effect, yeah, that seems like something that would happen, just random people. But like none of this was ever anything that I expected, but it's because I thought that my constitutional rights as a law-abiding citizen were my constitutional rights, and there was no reason whatsoever for those to be stripped from my freedoms as an American citizen.
Yeah. Is there anything that some of the, we didn't have room for everybody up here, but are there other pieces of the story from other co-plaintiffs that you guys know that you think we haven't covered yet that we need to share? Or Casey, if there's anything, I just want to.
It's you first.
I think we all have different stories and we're impacted differently, but we all have the same cry and plea. And in different ways we have been censored. But I think pretty much everything that we have said and that you all have said, it rings true with all of us.
Yeah.
So you want to be left alone to find other people that can provide support to help you go through what you're going through as long as you're going through it.
And to be able to, for the validation, to be able to say, hey, this is happening. These, you should have your full informed consent of what, risks are. And then be as an individual, you can choose that. So.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to throw it open to audience questions here in a minute. So be thinking about thinking about questions. But I wanted to just, Casey, come back to you with a couple of legal questions. We say this violates the First Amendment, but that's a little bit vague. So, I mean, one of the things that seems like is happening is that there's a kind of viewpoint discrimination here. I assume that Rob Flaherty and the other government people aren't going to the social media companies and saying, please take down those messages that are saying positive things about vaccines.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's exclusively voices of the vaccine injured, sharing their personal experiences, and also, as we said, privately exchanging knowledge, support for one another. And what they've said, as we discussed a bit, is that they deem this to be so harmful, so dangerous for American society to even think about the idea that people were injured by the vaccine, I guess, that Americans can't be exposed to that. And I think that's why we're seeing this kind of censorship, and that's how they justify it. It's a public health and safety and welfare issue.
Yeah, so there's speaker-based discrimination, there's viewpoint-based discrimination, and Brie, I'll ask you, is there a chilling effect here as a result of this? Is there less speech happening among people in your situation than there would be if there weren't this censorship occurring?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, it's hard to, figure out how to articulate what's happening in your body to begin with. And it's a whole other added layer to have a bunch of people coming at you constantly telling you that what you're saying is not okay. And so if your energy is limited already and you've got this extreme pushback, then a lot of people, they retreat from the situation altogether. And what it does is it leaves that person in a very dangerous situation, because then they're further isolating themselves from, essential, help that they would need. And that's actually...
And humanity.
Yeah, and that's actually what creates the perfect storm for two types of situations that we've seen. And one is the people that end up just quietly disappearing and then they end their life. And then the other actually is the people that are still in this acute phase where they're trying to figure out what's going on with their body. And then they're like, okay, well, I'm just going to be quiet about this and hide a little bit. And then their body gets into a worse situation. And then they're left in a more permanent, more severe state than what would have been afforded had they been able to find appropriate protocols that may have reversed the cascade of the disease. So,
one of the things I've heard you say, Brie, and maybe this is true of you too. I don't know offhand, that you've resorted to using code words sometimes to try to avoid getting messages taken down and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was, when we would admit people to the groups, it was like, here's the guidelines, and we know that you feel like crap and you can't think straight, but you need to remember all of these terms perfectly every time you're communicating in here, or else we're all going to get shut down. And it actually drove a lot of anxiety with the members. They were like, I'm so worried that I'm going to put something up that's going to ruin this for everyone, that they just would freeze and then not communicate at all. There's so much that it's like a domino effect. One thing falls and then it just knocks the rest of them down. And for people that are sick and suffering, it's like literal insult to injury.
Yeah. Well, and difficult to fight back when you're already down. Mm-hmm. And this is the government kicking people when they're down, is how I look at this.
Right.
Yeah, it's very interesting when you're trying to relay and ask a question about something, but there are trigger words or things that you've noticed in the past in your post. If you put that word, then it becomes flagged. or more likely to be taken down. And, people come up with other words for things such as vaccine or injury. So it wouldn't trigger this. It was almost like, so it was recognizing all of those words, and we had to be careful or we would be shut down or our post would be removed.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I had a college roommate who grew up in the Soviet Union, and it reminds me of what he used to talk about, the way that they would have to phrase things or talk about things or avoid certain words or topics because you never knew who was going to report you to the authorities if you said the wrong thing. So we've created that kind of Soviet style of hesitancy, not about vaccines, but about speech, which is frightening to me and certainly not consistent with the First Amendment. Let's go ahead and open this up to questions. John?
Where's the case located and where does it stand now?
So we filed this case in the Southern District Court of Texas. It's a federal court. And currently we've filed our complaint. The government has declined to answer, as has Stanford Internet Observatory. And
because they're claiming
so they had a deadline and it passed, and then they filed before the deadline a motion to stay or halt our case entirely, pending the Missouri v. Biden proceedings. They're saying that our cases are so identical that it's pointless to have them both going at the same time. It's a waste of judicial resources. So just hold on.
I thought I saw something where Stanford had claimed sovereign immunity.
Oh yeah, that too.
So Stanford is a private university, just so everybody knows, but they think very highly of themselves over on the West Coast. So sovereign immunity apparently is something that they're going to try here. Which, if they are sovereign, then they're definitely government, and they're definitely violating the First Amendment. So I thought that was interesting as well. Kara.
This is sort of directed at Bree because I'm fascinated by the fact that NIH flew you, and that's how you got your diagnosis. I mean, how does that get treated by the government to say, well, her diagnosis came from us, but you shouldn't listen to her? I mean, how's that almost duality or 180 positioning actually work for the government? I mean, are they actively pushing back on your speech, or how's that actually playing out? Because if it wasn't for the government, you wouldn't have had your diagnosis.
Yeah. So they're the ones that actually said I was a real person, not a Pinocchio. But then when it comes to informing social media and everybody else, I'm still Pinocchio. So it doesn't make a lot of sense, does it?
Thank you all. If I'm getting the case right, NCLA is asking for injunctive relief.
Right.
Now the other question is, the government's position is to avoid a position?
Yeah, they have not responded to us yet, so we don't officially have their arguments. I assume a motion to dismiss will happen at some point.
At what point does the government actually have to present?
So,
good question.
Yeah, so their deadline passed, but they filed a motion to stay our proceeding while Missouri v. Biden is going on. It's up in the appellate realm right now. And they've argued that because the cases hold certain similarities, they argue that they're almost identical cases, which is not true. They want to halt everything that's going on right now, avoid having to answer our complaint until that's resolved. I think they're just stalling, to be honest.
I think they're stalling because the story that Bree and Nikki and these other plaintiffs have to tell is particularly compelling, and I think that they don't want there to be a lot of oxygen for that story, and so they're trying to avoid responding as long as possible. They're trying to to stay the case as long as possible, which tells me that we're putting the focus in the right place by trying to get these stories out. Yeah. The only thing I'll say in the government's defense is they always behave this way. It doesn't matter what we sue them on. They always refuse to answer. You never get an answer from the government when you sue them. It's always a motion to dismiss. No, your case is moot. No, your case isn't right. There's always. I teach public interest litigation, and we spend an entire class period with the class explaining all the things you'll get other than an answer from the government when you sue them. So that's maybe a problem for another day, but they're at least behaving consistently here with that. But I do think that they're running scared as well. There was a question in the back, Clay.
The first question is, have you guys lost friends, loved ones who got mad at you? Because the government is basically not only silencing you but defaming you and labeling you with these harmful things. And there are people who literally think, as I think President Biden said, people are dying because of this misinformation. Have you guys personally? I know there's a lot of other things you've suffered, but on top of that, have you lost friends, family, jobs, coworkers?
I personally, my friends and family have been very supportive. My coworkers have been supportive. I'm luckily from one of the few areas in the world, Tennessee, where I've found a supportive community around me. It's more of the social media, the prowlers that come out of the woodwork and the hatred. You see it from both sides. You see it from the ones pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine, from conspiracy theorists to you should have known better. At least you didn't die of COVID. You just hear all sorts of rounds of hatred. But personally, as far as friends and family, I've been blessed that I have not lost.
Well, and to go along with that, I mean, the supportive friends and family is probably one of the most important pieces to the puzzle to help these people that are suffering with vaccine injury. I've had a little bit of a mixed situation. I have some family members that won't talk to me at all, but they talked to me clear up until I spoke public. So every one of my family members 100% believes my situation. But the issue they had was when I started to speak out, and it's been just my own firsthand experience. So, but then of course I have other family members that, go do it, So it's a mixed bag, but I do think that it's probably one of the most important things that everyday people can do is if you know someone that's injured, to reach out to them and just let them know that you see them, that that you want to help them and that you're there to listen. And it really just helps them feel like, okay, there's people there to support me. I'm not in this on my own.
Casey, do you think that this lunch and law session will be censored?
I mean, based on some of our previous luncheon laws recently, could be, honestly.
We'll see. This is a test, social media companies. See if you pass this time. You failed last time on our Missouri v. Biden, lunch and law, but we're giving you a second chance here. There was another question from the online audience?
Yeah, the second question was addressed to Casey and Mark. You guys mentioned that the government's policy or position seems to be a utilitarian one about trying to save lives, or that it would be if you could talk to the regulators. And the question online is, isn't a utilitarian approach at odds with the fundamental rights enshrined in the Constitution, and or is there some kind of loophole that we're just the person online is just not aware of?
Yeah, I don't think there's a loophole. I think that's very insightful comment by the person online. Individual rights are not consistent with the utilitarian outlook, right? The utilitarian situation is if you're on a lifeboat, then the utilitarian thing is you only have enough food for however many people. One of those people has to go so that everybody else can survive. That's the utilitarian. But obviously that person's individual rights are severely violated in that situation. We have an individual rights model. We don't have a utilitarian model. I'll tell you who does have a utilitarian model is the Chinese, where they will take the organs from living people and redistribute them to other people so that multiple people can live. Now that's a utilitarian approach to medicine. It's also horrific and evil, but they do it. So that's a different approach. I think that what we're talking about here with saying that everybody needs to have a medical procedure regardless of what is whether they're well suited for it or not. I think that does tend to be more down that libertarian line and not taking account of the individual rights, whether those are rights to free speech, rights to consent and informed consent, whether those are rights to maybe not in this case, but in other cases, right to refuse the vaccine and not lose your job. Those are individual rights that we believe at NCLA are important to protect.
Nothing holds people accountable for misconduct more than getting forced to pay damages. And I know that's not the type of thing we do at NCLA, but is there any prospect?
Damages from the government, as you know.
Is everyone immunized, even Stanford? Is there any prospect of these people getting compensated for the damage and havoc they've had to go through?
And I might put that to Bree because there is a second lawsuit on behalf of the vaccine injured that's kind of addressing that point, the compensation rights for the vaccine injured. I don't know if you want to go into any of that detail.
Yeah, so with another lawsuit that actually filed last week with Aaron Siri and ICANN, with several injured plaintiffs and React 19, which is our organization, they are challenging the constitutionality of the CICP, which is the one and only taxpayer-funded program that we are allowed to file claims on. This current program has a 97% rejection rate. It's paid less than $18,000 total in 2 years to COVID vaccine injured for medical expenses. So it's very obvious that the program has some problems. There's no due process allowed. You can't have legal representation. You can't sue for pain and suffering. So that's another avenue that we're just beginning to initiate because, free speech should be a constitutional right that we have protected in this situation, but also our right to sue should also be protected as well. So we'll see what happens with that, and in the meantime, we'll see if there's any other avenue to get these people compensation, because $18,000 total for all injuries in the United States is abysmal and a huge embarrassment to our country.
Well, NCLA is not involved with that lawsuit, but good luck to you. Are there any final thoughts or takeaways that you want to leave the audience with, Nikki?
I think it's just the opportunity to have people like you all, your organization, and others out there that support us, that take a voice when some of us can't. Just like we're here taking a voice for some of them that physically aren't able to or are scared. And I think that's huge as far as the American people to pull together for those that are injured and do not have a voice. And it's with great gratitude that I thank you all for that opportunity to fight for us, that you all do.
Well, you're welcome, but thank you, because it takes bravery to be a plaintiff in these lawsuits and to have your name and your face associated with a fight against the federal government. So we appreciate the bravery of our clients in standing up to this. Bree, do you have any final takeaways or thoughts for the audience?
Oh, well, I totally agree with Nikki, so thank you so much. I mean, it's been a really hard, crazy 3 years, and, but at the same time, I wouldn't have, been able to have my eyes opened in any other way, because I'm so stubborn. Now the government has to see how stubborn I really am. But at the same time, I mean, the vaccine injury community are some of the most brave, resilient people that I've ever met in my life. That includes Nikki. So anyway, yeah, it's an incredible honor to be in this dumpster fire with some phenomenal people.
That's right.
So thanks for what you guys are doing.
Yeah, thank you. Casey, how about you? Final thoughts?
I mean, I second that. It's an honor to be a part of this, to be able to help. Like you said, I mean, this community, you as individuals and you as a group are incredible. I mean, just courageous, and I'm just glad that I can have a role in helping you in any way that I can, that NCLA can. So thank you for letting us bring this suit forward and be a part of it.
And thank you for letting us help get your story out there, because I think that it's important that people hear about this. I think that, and maybe my final question to you is, if there are other people out there who do hear about this and who are in the same situation as the two of you, what should they do? Is there any public way to get in touch with you, or does it have to be through these sort of kind of surreptitious means because the censorship is ongoing?
Yeah, so I mean, it's really just word of mouth. We set up an advocacy organization to try to help people find access to doctors and the finances. I mean, so through React 19. React
19? Is there a website?
React19.org.
React19.org.
Yep. So, and through that organization, we've been able to distribute $750,000 in medical grants to individuals that are suffering with adverse events.
So you've done 750,000. The government's done 18,000.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, we have no corporate sponsorship, no philanthropic donations. It's like our average donation is $81.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, there are really phenomenal people in this country. There really are. And so, you know, the government's not doing their job, and it looks like they're not going to do it for years, and they're going to be forced to have to fix it. In the meantime, it's up to us to help each other and take care of each other.
Well, there are only so many trillions of dollars to go around, Bree. So has to make hard choices. And you know, just on behalf of the New Civil Liberties Alliance and our esteemed panel, I want to thank you all for attending this Lunch and Law event entitled "The Censorship-Industrial Complex Silences the Vaccine Injured." I hope you've learned something. I've certainly learned something. And I would invite you to join us for more NCLA events like this, both Lunch and Laws as well as an episode of Wine and Cheese that will be up online shortly, where I sit down with former UPenn swim team member Paula Scanlon as we discuss her perspective on the importance of Title IX and fairness in women's sports, as well as the forces that sought to silence and deplatform her voice on those issues. So please join me in thanking our panel for today's presentation.